Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of our Trusted Service Provider Expert Series. I am Johanna Kjesbu. I'm the Director of Vendor Management here at CAMS. And today we have Nick Brenneman with Reserve Advisors. Hey, Nick, how's it going?
Hey, Johanna, doing great. Thanks for having me today. Excited about this.
Absolutely. We are going to dive in today talking about real life reserve studies, their impacts, and the benefits that they provide for our communities. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Nick?
Sure. I'm Nick Brenneman. I'm the Regional Account Manager for Reserve Advisors here in the Southeast region. I've been with the firm for 14 years, and basically day in and day out, I'm talking about reserve studies, and I'm working with boards and property managers to make sure that they're educated and informed on what a reserve study is, what the benefits are, and that they're going to be prepared to have the conversations that are going to come up. That's why today I've kind of titled it real life reserve studies, because hopefully you can get some good talking points, some good takeaways that when you go to your next board meeting and this topic does come up, whether it's with your manager, fellow board members, or even homeowners, that you feel a bit more prepared and equipped to answer them, that can get you at least one step closer to being more effective with your reserves and being on a path for financial sustainability for the community.
Absolutely. It's all about taking proactive measures and trying to, as much as we can't foresee what the future holds or have that crystal ball, this is probably about the next best thing from that crystal ball, right? To be able to give us an idea of how to navigate things that are going to come up, but we don't necessarily know when. And this will help to fulfill that fiduciary responsibility among our board members.
Yeah, they say you don't know what you don't know, and sometimes
Yeah,
you don't even know what questions to ask. So nobody has a crystal ball, but understanding the concept of reserves and how they've been designed to work, at least you understand, that there's options out there. If you're not doing it this way, there's a better way. There's an
yes.
easier way. Best practices.
That sounds great. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing what you have for us today.
Awesome. Let's jump in. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen here. So real life reserve studies. A lot of times reserve studies um, get kind of a bad name. That what I hear a lot in my line of work is we don't need a reserve study. And a lot of board members want to do the right thing. You wouldn't be in that position if you didn't, but sometimes it's just hard to know how to make that happen. And so I think my first slide is really, we've got to frame, get the right perspective before we start talking about the topic. And in reality, when a reserve study is done right, for the right reasons, with the right firm, with the right professionals, that is going to be, a custom solution designed for your specific association, it's a win-win. And it's a win-win really for all parties involved. But what I'm talking about here is for your members, the homeowners, and the board, that there's benefits to each by getting the reserve study. And, is it advantageous and satisfactory to all parties involved? And if it's not, then you're probably doing it wrong, because at its very nature, the reserve study is designed to help board members and to help the homeowners for a number of reasons. So I really wanted to spend some time with Johanna talking about the benefits of reserves and reserve studies. Then I thought about what's really going to resonate. And I think we should start with all the excuses, because this conversation is always full of excuses. And some of these may sound familiar. I hear them all the time. And I'd like to just kind of talk through some of those, because let's look a little bit deeper. So I'd say let's keep an open mind. If you're hearing someone say these things, or maybe you're the one saying them, that's fine. It goes against our human nature to do long-term planning and to think about the future and to pay more now so we don't have to pay later. So the very first one that I hear is, I'm not going to be here when that needs to be replaced. Valid. You might not be. I mean, when we're talking about reserves, these are long-term capital projects, and some of the lives of these components might outlast how long you're going to live at that community. But that's not an excuse, because if you're on the board, It's not about where you're going to be when that needs to be replaced, whether you're here or there or anywhere. It's about where the association Inc. is going to be. And so you need to put on your board hat and really acting for the greater good, aligned with your fiduciary duty. So I'm not going to be here when that needs to be replaced. It's, if you're a board member, that's not the right mentality. If you're an owner, okay, that's fair. They have a right to feel that way. And they're not the ones that are tasked with thinking about the long term of the association. You have to, as a board member, you have to lead the way and show them that path. But it's as we continue this conversation, you'll see the things that we can communicate to the members as well. A reserve study costs money. Yeah, they're not free.
Yep.
You hire a professional firm. It's going to be a few $1,000s, and you're going to get experts that are giving you expert guidance that's reliable, that you can have confidence in, and that does come at a cost for their time and their expertise. But it's an investment. We need to look at it as an investment. We're not just throwing this money away. And ultimately, it's going to be up to the board on if they make the most of that investment. And what I mean by that is, if you're just paying a reserve study provider and you're hands off and say, just send us the report when you're done, you're probably not going to love what you see when you get it back. It's probably not going to align with your strategic objectives. There's probably going to be things that are left off, or that were more important to you, the areas of focus that the provider just wasn't aware of. So yeah, a reserve study costs money, but it's inevitable. Nothing is free. And what we can do as a board to combat that is, let's make the most of our investment. So let's, if we're going to pay, let's pay someone that's going to do it right. Let's be involved in the process to make sure that ultimately the report, the end product, is going to be accurate, useful, and reflect what's really going on at our association. And that I'm here to tell you that that's possible. There's firms that really make sure that that happens. And there's other firms that are more hands off and are there's more of a standardized reserve study out there. Not going to be necessarily quite as helpful, because the reserve study company coming in doesn't know your association like you do. And so it's really going to be on the board to say, this is what's important to us. This is what's been really challenging for us. And that we can, look into that further and advise on those situations or those specific challenges or components. It's
That's
not
a great
required.
point.
Oh, yeah.
When you say that there could be a standard approach, I would venture to say that a more custom approach, because no property is the same. That while there can be many that are similar in size, scope, and just nature of the property, that a good reserve study will take a custom approach because of the different life expectancy and some of the materials. Are you closer to the coast where you're more susceptible to hurricanes? Are you more inland where tornadoes or hailstorms may come in? These are all things that will create the wear and tear on the property. And there really isn't just one size fits all dynamic with these. So yep. Would you say that I'm correct in saying that a custom approach is really the best way to go about this with objectives in mind?
It's really the only way to go if you want something that's actually going to be useful.
Yep.
And you're not just going through the motions. And, there are national reserve study standards that firms, have to follow, and there's designations for reserve study providers. So when I say that it's custom, it's not completely customized, but I like to say that the reserve study is not always black and white. There's a lot of gray area. And some of that can be just on like the board's approach and what's worked well for them in the past, what they're going to be doing. If there's something that they're doing, a certain practice or a timing or something like that they're going to just continue to do, and the reserve study provider should be aware of that. And if they feel like it's appropriate, and they should build that into the study so that ultimately we want it to align with reality. That's one of the biggest challenges. And I think that's why it's like, man, what a waste of money was that reserve study. It's so useless because we do things so different here, or they forgot about this, or they didn't know about that. But you have the power to impact that. So, not only should you make sure that the firm is going to be willing and able to do that. But also as the board, you guys want to take an active role in that process too, because it's
Yeah.
ultimately going to benefit you in the long run. It's not required. This is great because we're talking, mainly to some Carolinas folks here. And you're right, it's not required. You're not required by law to have a reserve study. You're not required, by law to fund your reserve study. And that does present some challenges because there's states right now that are required to have reserve studies for community associations, for condo associations. They're required to fund exactly according to what that reserve study recommends. So you don't have the law necessarily on your side. So as a board member,
Yeah.
you can say, yeah, it's not required, so we don't have to do it. I would say it's not required, so it's more important that you do it because the buck stops with you. You and your manager are the team that's going to make it happen. And if you're not planning ahead, if you're not, investing in this tool and taking advantage of this opportunity, which the reserve study really is, it's an
Yeah.
opportunity to just have all of these benefits and just make life easier for everyone, which we'll get into in a minute here. But it's that much more important that you do it because there's no requirement. And the fact that
And
other
it's not to
states,
say that requirement won't come down the road. It might not
exactly
be
where I was
required
going.
now. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. That we see that changing all the time, especially in condo communities. That I would not be surprised if a requirement is not far behind in the Carolinas.
And where we do see it required, the associations that are really doing well and kind of unmoved by that regulation are the ones that have always been getting reserve studies. They've been diligently funding their reserves
Yeah.
because it's the right thing to do. It's how it's been designed to work. And the ones if and when those regulations do hit, the ones that have put it off and kicked the can and are older buildings with a lot of near-term high dollar
Yeah.
projects,
They're
I mean,
going to
just
be
to
in a
put it
world of
plainly,
hurt.
they're feeling a lot of pain. Exactly. And
Yep.
hindsight is a real thing. And they wish that they, had started earlier. So, yeah, the sooner you can do it, the better. The next one, fixed incomes or the fees will be too high. That comes up all the time. I'm here to tell you that, we're not doing anyone any favors by not being realistic about what it costs to live at and maintain our community. So the fees will be too high. Reserves aren't like a wish list or a nice to have. This is just to keep things status quo. Your owners bought into this community and the roads were a certain way, the roofs weren't leaking, the amenities were functioning. Just to keep that happening, just to keep that as it is going to cost money over time.
Yep.
So the fees will be too high. If you think that's the case, then I'm here to tell you that your fees are probably too low and they're being artificially suppressed because you're ignoring what your real reserve requirements look like. And that's going to lead to challenges down the road. It could be in the form of, special assessments or the community just in disrepair. Ultimately, the value of the units going down, the desirability, marketability. So we wanted to be honest with ourselves about the cost of living. And if we're keeping those dues low, that's one where it's like everybody wants all the benefit, but they don't want any of the burden.
Yeah.
And if you've got an older community, and I have board members brag, we haven't raised our dues in 10 years. I don't celebrate that. That's frightening because you look around and everything else has gone up substantially in 10 years.
Yeah.
There's
That's
something's got to
red
give.
flag.
Exactly. Something's got to give. And we'll just take a loan out if we need the money. Loans are definitely an option for larger capital projects. You do have to, qualify for the loan. And a lot of the bankers that I know that work in the community association industry tell me that a reserve study and the health and strength of their reserves is one of the factors when they're approving a loan. So if you think you can just turn a blind eye to, having reserves at all, because the loan will be there waiting for you when you need it, that's might be a misconception there. So reserves are going to be, important even if you are needing a loan.
Yeah.
Which certainly might be, a good idea depending on how the project, what the project looks like and when you need those funds, and just kind of the financial snapshot of the community. and then special assessment. So there's really, I'd say 4 things you can do when it comes to capital projects and how you fund them. One is fund them out of reserves, which is what we're advocating here. Everyone pays their fair share on an ongoing basis. We have a long-term plan. The other is to take out a loan and get that, borrow that money at a cost, pay to borrow that money if we can get approved for it. The third would be to special assess, which is let's just wait until we need to do this project, and then we'll just assess every owner for their share of that specific project at the time we do the project. Not really a great way of doing things because it's not equitable. Your owners, they want to have, predictable budgeting, predictable contributions to the reserves, and predictable assessments. And so reserves are a great way to do that. A special assessment, if whoever's living there at that time, when the bomb drops, they're the ones that are paying the full amount.
Pleased.
And if you think about it, it's really not fair because someone could have just moved out and just in the nick of time missed that bill for new roofs on the townhomes that they lived in for 20 years and didn't pay a dime.
Yeah.
So reserves are, they're equitable because everybody's paying their fair share. And when you have this long-term plan and a cash flow analysis, doesn't matter when you move in or out, everyone's going to be paying their fair share. So it's important that the reserve contributions are equitable. And then another excuse is, well, we just don't know what items we should be reserving for. And that's what we're here for.
Exactly.
That's what a reserve study is designed for, is to identify what you should be reserving for, how much, and when.
Yep.
So that's just some of the excuses that I hear, and hopefully some good talking points to help you debunk those, or even just, like I said, keep an open mind, maybe look a little bit further than just the surface level. I mean, it does seem really easy to just kind of throw out those excuses and move on. I guess reserve studies just aren't for us because of this, and this. But, it's here, as I say, it's pay now or pay later. So
actually, I have one point to that very first bullet point you had on that last slide. And let me know if I'm going way too far down the rabbit hole on this one, but that is the number one excuse. Well, I'm not going to be here when that needs to be replaced. Well, a real more closer on proximity answer to that would be, okay, so maybe you won't be here in 15 years living in this neighborhood when the roofs need to be replaced, but you are wanting to protect to some degree your investment now. When you have, say you're in a new community or an established community, if there are people that are trying to buy into that community, a lot of the mortgage loans, they're looking at the financial health of that community. And if they are not properly funded, if the reserves are not properly funded, then it may make it more difficult for people to purchase into the community, therefore reducing your property values. Again, maybe I'm going too far down the rabbit hole, but I feel like I've seen that happen where if it's just not properly funded and the people, the potential buyers are looking into, and the mortgage loans are reviewing what the financial health is of that community, and they don't see it properly funded, they're maybe a little bit hesitant to offer a loan.
Yeah, I would say that will happen. Not even that it may happen. I mean, the mortgage brokers, the lenders, they know about this reserve stuff, and they want to make sure that, maybe we can, my applicant can afford this loan as it's written, but can they afford the $10,000 special assessment next year because they have no money in reserves and the community is 40 years old? Definitely valid. And also, prospective buyers are getting more and more informed and knowledgeable about reserves. It's on the nightly news now when that building in Surfside collapsed.
Yeah.
And now that, like I said, there's states requiring reserves. If you've got
property
two communities that you're looking to buy, and they have pretty much the same components and the same maintenance responsibilities, very similar communities, but there's drastic difference in what my assessments are.
Yep.
there's some, like I said, something's got to give, and the owners are looking into that. So
Yeah.
they want healthy reserves. It increases the marketability,
Yeah.
the desirability. And I
And
talk
that's one
about
that
the
could
reserve
directly
study.
affect the current homeowners, the current
100%,
board members.
100%.
Yep.
I talk about this word investment when it comes to the reserve study. And when you're looking at home values, getting a reserve study, following a reserve study, having the money to do the projects, doing them on time when it's needed, that's all investing into the value of the community and the value of those units. And it does pay back, like it does pay off, because
Yeah.
the community that's letting everything go has no reserves and has, a reputation for special assessments, and no one wants to live there anymore, and the value of the units start going down.
Yep.
It looks very different than
It's
a
a big
community
deterrent.
that is on top of it financially. And people are aware of that, whether they're, lenders, banks, or even just the people that are buying and selling in that community. But yeah, super valid point. So frame the conversation, you got to sell it. What I mean by this is, like, as a board, this is marketing, this is sales. If you're in front of the members, you have to choose your words carefully. We're not trying to play any tricks on anyone, but we want to be transparent. We want to be informed. We want to be knowledgeable. Just like those excuses, those things come up. We want to be prepared for them. So this is a good one. Pay now or pay later. And the idea here is that the roofs don't care. As an example, if we reserve for them or not, they're not going to last forever, and we're going to need to pay for it one way or another. Nothing lasts forever, and getting old is expensive. So just remember
Isn't that
that,
the truth?
even for people, right? Like,
Yeah.
for
That one
anything,
hits a little
getting old
deep,
is
Nick.
expensive. And so pay now or pay later. And then I was thinking, pay now and save later is maybe a better way, because you're going to save yourself time. You're going to save yourself stress and money and headaches, surprises, safety issues, financial deficits, inefficiency, distrust, special assessments, mortgage difficulties, declining home values. These are things that we can mitigate, or at least help mitigate, by properly funding our reserves, being diligent about that. And there's no time like the present. The sooner that you begin, the better. So hindsight is a real thing. When I'm talking to an older community that has no reserves and they just wish that they would have started sooner. If you're out there and they're like, well, we're a brand new community. Everything's going to last a long time. We're not going to have any major projects for a while. We don't need to worry about reserves. You've
That's
got
the
the
best time to
perfect
do it.
opportunity, right?
Yep.
You got a perfect opportunity in front of you to set you up for success. And you've got a lot of time to fund up for those projects, and all communities can benefit, whether you're big, small, condo, HOA, townhome, complex, simple, because ultimately it's going to be a plan that's a perfect fit for you.
Yeah.
And some associations think that they're too small or too simple for that, but
Yeah.
then your budget
I
is small.
recently saw that come up.
Yeah.
Well, we don't have a lot of common expenses. We don't have a lot of common area. We just have, our streets, sidewalks, and a pool. Well, that pool has some expenses to it, and they
Right.
are pretty finicky when you need to expense and think about the things that'll come, whether it be the plaster or painting, the hardscapes around it. That all of that costs money very quickly. So you may be or community that doesn't even have a pool, but you still have the roads to maintain and common areas. Every property is different, and they all have things that they need to consider when it comes to budgeting for that.
Yeah, and the reserve study, it identifies all of your reserve components. So you might look at your community and say, we don't really have anything. But a reserve study provider with a trained eye might come out and say, well, what about this stormwater system?
Yep.
What about these ponds that are going to need to be
Yes.
dredged? There's more than meets the eye. And some of it is kind of out of sight, out of mind. Or maybe you have, a vendor that's coming monthly and doing the maintenance on this component, but we don't really have a plan for the long term for a major project or a replacement.
Yeah.
Those types of things. So, and the good news is, if you are small and you are simple, then your reserve study will be small and simple, and it's usually priced on how complex the study is, and so you're going to have more of an inexpensive reserve study.
Yep. It gives you a plan. It gives you
Yep.
a guideline.
100%. Yeah, financial roadmap is a
Yep.
great term when we're talking
I like
about
that.
it.
Yeah.
Because it's a 30-year plan. So we're really getting that 30,000-foot view, and we can be much more strategic about how we do things rather than just waiting until something falls apart or we get 100 emails complaining about, a component or something that's not safe. We can look at everything that's coming up ahead down the road, not with a crystal ball, but because we can, identify the remaining useful life. We look at the condition. We know an idea of, what the estimated costs are going to be. We can put a long-term financial projection together using an inflationary factor. It's very sophisticated, so we can get very close.
Yeah.
And then as we update these studies every, 2-3 years, make sure that everything's still on track. We're still following, an accurate plan. So that's an important point too.
Yeah.
Is it's a 30-year forecast, but it's not set it and forget it. You want to keep this thing up to date, and there's tools to do that. Like Reserve Advisors will give the Excel file with the formulas for your financial analysis. So now you have a living document of everything, all these variables that we captured at that moment in time when the study was prepared that change over time. Maybe it's the inflation, maybe it's your actual contributions to the reserves, timing of a project, whatever that is, project cost. You can, manipulate all that and move all of that
Yeah.
to keep following an accurate plan.
It's a living, breathing document that moves with you with time, and being able to do that check-in every 2 to 3 years or so will definitely help. I mean, you run into a situation where, let's say in 10 years, you're looking to reserve the roofs. Well, a hurricane came through and now you've had to replace it much quicker than you initially anticipated. And so now you need to move the funds around, and where maybe in the plan you were forecasting what the roofs will cost 10 years from now, but you did it sooner, so the cost was actually a lot less than you anticipated, and that factors in as well.
Yeah, it's all related, and
Yep.
each year kind of builds on itself. So we're in whatever we're recommending for next year. The following year is recommended, the expenses that are identified and the funding. It's based on the previous year's funding and expenses
Yep.
all aligning like that. And so that's a really valid point, that if you've got a new board comes on and looking for the reserve study, they found a reserve study. It was done 4 years ago, and now it's budget time. And so they look to the reserve study and it says what the contribution should be. And then they just put plug that number into their budget. Well, that contribution now is 4 years of previous contributions to the reserves, previous projects, timings and costs, a certain inflation rate, all had to happen in order for that contribution to still make sense.
Yep.
So that's why having that living document is so important, to make sure that we're still on track. And then you can bring in the professional to do an update. Best practice is probably every 3 years with a site visit to look at the useful lives again, and then recalibrate everything, bring everything up to current costs, your balances, and make sure that you're still following a plan that aligns with reality. Because
Like a
ultimately,
temperature
over
check,
time.
right?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yep.
For sure. And you want to have confidence in this plan. And so if you're looking at it, we kind of did a lot of things that they didn't recommend sooner, or we really haven't been following those funding recommendations like they suggested.
Mhm.
Those types of things are kind of indicators that it might be time to update the study and make sure that you're still following a plan that's ultimately going to make sure we're adequately funded when the money's there when we need it. So the last couple of things I wanted to cover, now that we did talk about some of those excuses, are just get right into some of those benefits. And so what's in it for me? Board members, it fulfills your fiduciary duty. You have a fiduciary duty to uphold to the association. And it does that in a number of ways, but really what's happening here is you're using good business judgment. You're relying on independent third-party professionals to make these planning decisions of what types of projects you're going to do and when, how you're going to fund your reserves. And that's going to set you up for success. It's also going to help you prioritize projects. As I mentioned, we got that 30,000-foot view now, so we can eliminate those hours and hours of board meetings where we're going back and forth about, if we're fortunate enough to have reserves, what is the right thing to be spending them on right now? What is our top priority? And then you do the wrong thing and you realize, man, we really should have done that other project. Well, the reserve study will hopefully help minimize that, because now you can see what are your near-term priorities, what is more discretionary, or what can be pushed off a little bit, because we're looking at everything all at once. And you're getting this third-party independent information, which leads into that next one, that's going to build trust and confidence in the board and the decisions that you make, because now this isn't Gary's idea. This wasn't Beth's idea. They're relying on this report that they had done. And so the bias is taken out of there. Even just a perceived bias can be a very powerful thing. And so that really helps you deliver this message, deliver this plan with more confidence. The fact that it's not coming from you, it's not just one person's opinion. And that is really a game changer from, that's what I've seen over time. Simplifies budgeting, budget time. What do we need to put in reserves? Crack open the reserve study. There's our number. Of course, that's kind of an extreme example for simplicity, but really you've got your living document. All right, let's enter our actual expenditures. Let's enter our actual balances. Very easy what we need to reserve for, and we can move on at budget time. Reduces maintenance costs. That's that diminishing return. Are we putting good money on bad components? If we don't have money and we're kind of picking and choosing what we do, usually that's
putting a
something
band-aid
that
on
happens.
certain things.
Right, where ultimately we're just paying more than if we would have replaced it at the right time, if we're looking at the total cost of ownership. And then I like this idea of like alignment and agreement, call it the North Star. A board can be very effective when everybody's on the same page, and vice versa. When they're not, it can be very inefficient to get anything done. And so the reserve study is almost like this guiding North Star. And if there are discrepancies on approaches with certain components, or just in that gray area, we work that out during the process, and ultimately whatever is published is kind of the board saying, this is our agreed upon approach and this is what we're going to follow. And hopefully then when the board turns over, that document kind of outlasts any one particular board. And the community almost has this continuance of the vision, which is, they're not starting from scratch every single time, which can be very disruptive. And you lack any sort of real consistency. So I've talked about the other ones there. And the reserve study is a great starting place for project costs and bids. So now you're getting a company that doesn't do the job. I have nothing to gain from your roof replacement. All I want to do is tell you what an accurate cost is so that you can be set up for success. So now when it's time, now when it's time to do a project and you start getting these bids back, do they align with what the reserve study projected? And if they don't, then let's talk about that. Your reserve study provider can, look at the scope and see, maybe it's not the same scope of work, or maybe it's not a fair price, or, whatever that is. You're going into that bidding much more informed. You've got a great independent starting place, and informed and empowered. So a lot of really great benefits for board members to having a reserve study, to keeping it up to date, to funding those reserves. But I like to talk about the excuses before I talk about the benefits, because those are kind of like the barrier to get here.
Before you can even get to that point. Yeah.
Exactly. And this is really, some great points there. And then benefits for the homeowners too. So as a board, we can feel good about doing this because it benefits our owners. Or these are great talking points at a meeting where you're trying to sell this idea of the reserve study. Transparency, communication is key. Ultimately, we don't want to just force this on anybody. It would be great if we can, get buy-in from everybody, have them understand what we're trying to accomplish so that there's harmony in the community. And so, look, we're trying to avoid any special assessments. By looking at a realistic look at what it costs to live here and what these big projects are going to be, we're going to collect the money accordingly, kind of on an ongoing basis. And, if this is different than how we've done things in the past, let's explain that. Let's talk through that. Why are we changing it? And, what is this going to accomplish? But it's pay now or pay later. You want to pay a little bit every year and know what you're going to pay? Or would you rather just have have us ask you for a check for $10,000 or something, next year or in 5 years. So that's a big selling point is, look, we want to do you guys a favor so you know what you need to pay and that there's no surprises later on. And it's going to be equitable. It's going to keep, we talked about this, a lot of the other board benefits also benefit the owners, but the community will be well maintained, standing tall, functioning. The pool won't be closed down because the heater's broken and we can't afford to replace or repair the heater. It's going to be a nicer place to live. It's going to be a safer place to live. Safety, if you're in a multi-story building or even, really any community, a lack of funds, a lack of, investigating issues, a lack of maintenance can lead to safety issues, whether it's water infiltration causing mold, getting into the units, or a multi-story building that has balconies that aren't,
structural issues,
structurally safe. So safety is a big one. And actually that in this, where we're seeing reserve studies being required, a lot of what's driving that is the safety. And it's that they want to make sure that these buildings have the funds available to keep them safe for the people who are living in them. It also promotes a harmonious community. We're all on the same page. Preserves property values, protects owners' investment, like you mentioned, Johanna. And then it satisfies mortgage and lending requirements. So, you want to sell your unit, they want to see the reserve study, whether that's the person, approving the loan or the person who's buying the home. And, there's also like FHA has requirements for condo loans that you have to have had a recent reserve study or be funding a certain percentage of your budget to reserves. So that's just one example that's kind of far reaching.
Yep.
That, if you don't meet those requirements, you're going to be already blocking out a large portion of potential buyers and making it harder to sell units in that community.
I would say I have one more point.
Yes.
That would be for board members too, but ultimately homeowners. As a board member, I have a very risk management type of mindset in everything that I do. And I would say that one of the deterrents for board members of even running to be a board member is that they worry about litigation. They worry about making the wrong decision and or not making a decision. And so having a reserve study gives you a plan, gives you the action to move forward, so that they are reducing the risk of accusations of neglect from homeowners. We've seen it here on the coast. And I keep talking about the coast, but Hurricane Florence came through and board members didn't know how to act. And they just put it off and they put it off and they put it off to the point where now the roof issue became an interior issue. Mold was occurring. And we have homeowners that are complaining because the board did not act. And therefore they're having issues with neglect and the homeowners are winning. So when you have a plan in place and you have a reputable company that you can go back to inquire, like, okay, how do I handle this? I know this is something that we have in our reserve study, but how do I move forward? Because this is changing our plan. What do we do? Now you have someone to go to that you can get that third party, no skin in the game, but it helps you to build the next steps in a harmonious, I see the word right in front of me, way, and avoid issues of litigation because of accusations of neglect.
Yeah, that's so good. That I should have added that on there, is that idea of the board liability.
Yep.
By fulfilling that fiduciary duty.
Yeah.
It's huge. And then the other point that you made is, the reserve study provider is not only, just giving you guidance on preparing that document, but they're going to be available as a resource for those conversations moving forward, where you do encounter those challenges or don't know how to respond to a certain question. You're going to have that resource. Whereas if you don't, if you're not relying on a professional and going it alone, it can be very challenging. Yeah, the liability one is huge.
Yeah.
And, imagine that, some owner wants to sue you as the board because they feel like you were negligent or something like that. They look in the minutes, the reserve study kept getting recommended, you kept putting it down and saying we don't need that. And it's Yeah, that's a huge one. The states that require reserve studies, they say that it's a breach of your fiduciary duty if you don't follow this law
Yep.
and you don't get that reserve study. So it's something that yeah, liability is definitely a big concern there. Thanks for adding that.
Yeah. Well, there's
Now
so
this
many complex parts of this, and it's impossible to think of everything that can go into it. But that being one of the big deterrents that people don't want to run on the board because they're worried about the liability. And when you have something like this, that's a plan in place, it takes the guesswork out of it.
Yeah, I do a lot of like manager training.
Hmm.
And there's this one that I do several times a year for new managers. So they're all new to the industry. And I love teaching that one because especially where reserve studies aren't required. Because I tell them like this is almost like your secret weapon
Yeah.
because since it's not required and it really has so many benefits, it's going to make your job easier as a manager. It's going to make your boards more effective. It's going to make the members more confident in what the board is doing. Like if it's just there's something different about a community that is doing it right
Yep.
compared to the one that's not, and it's almost like a tale of two associations. And you can imagine what life looks like as an owner or as a board in the one that's kind of doing it the wrong way, flying by the seat of their pants, putting out fires and special assessing, compared to one that is, talking, handling things the way that we've described here. Um, and I get it. I'm not oblivious to the fact that like why I call this real life reserve studies is this all sounds great in theory, but Nick, you don't know my board, or Nick, you don't know these
Yeah.
owners, you don't know what's transpired. I get that. That's why I started with, like I said earlier, like started with the pushback because that you're gonna get that, um, and we just gotta to lead them, show them the light, and help them do the right thing. Um, this last one is a little technical, but not too much. And they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. Show me the money. This is I'm not going to explain an entire funding plan and reserve study front and back. We just simply don't have time for that.
All
But
right,
what you're
Tom
seeing
Cruise.
here, what's that?
All right, Tom Cruise. Show me the money.
Exactly. I mean, that's what it comes down to at the
Yep.
end. And what we're looking at here, this is a long-term plan. This is a reserve studies financial analysis, just in a graphical form. And there's really three components to it. The years go across the columns, and the dollars, that's your year-end reserve balance on the side. And the three components are the red bars, those are your reserve expenditures. And then the blue line, that's your year-end reserve balance. So at the end of each year, moving down the graph, how much money do we have left in our reserves? And then the green bars are our recommended reserve contributions. How much do we put into our reserves each year? And this really tells the story of doing it right. And what that is Bill, the red bars, they're all there. We got all 30 years. We know what the expenses are, when they're going to happen, approximately how much they're going to be. And so we could imagine that those first two big ones in 23, 24, 25, that's going to be maybe our roofs or our roads, some type of major project. And you can see some years have more projects, more higher costs, expenditures, and others have less.
Drops off. Yeah.
It's always going to be like that. And that's out of our control. But there are some things that we can control. And one is like, let's wrap our arms around all those projects. And then the other thing is look at our reserve balance. So some people think when I say, oh, we want to have healthy reserves, that just means more and more money in reserves. Like, and that's not what we mean. When we say healthy reserves, it's really about a level of adequacy. And the adequacy being when we have years where we have major expenses, do we have money that we need to cover those expenses? And are we prepared for everything that's to come? And so you can see our reserve balance doesn't just shoot up to the sky because we're doing our duty and funding reserves, but we're saving some money in the earlier years, and then we're spending some money, and then we're saving up again for those bigger projects that are way out there in 2043, 2044, and then we're going to spend again. And so our reserve balance almost kind of follows this wave of expenditures, and it's this balance of spending and saving. Technically, it's a cash flow analysis. So we're balancing the cash in with the cash out, what we're putting in our reserves with the projects that are coming up. And the one thing that this illustrates is that blue line never goes below zero. So we never have a deficit. We never need to special assess. We can always draw that money out of our reserves and we can confidently do that. And then like the biggest takeaway here is the green bars are very stable, and they're increasing slightly, and that's just to account for inflation. So there's an inflationary increase there. But generally, the takeaway here is, look, if we know what's coming up and we plan ahead, we can collect stable, adequate, equitable contributions over time, and our reserve funds, our reserve balance, can weather those costs, can weather those projects, and we're not going to be at a risk of special assessment. And so that's really what it comes down to. And I really like this graph because we also do this in numerical, where you see every cost every year, which is great, but it can be a little overwhelming. And I think that what's really important is to understand conceptually, how does this work? And everything that we talked about, okay, but show me the money. How do I make sure like our contributions are low and stable while still having the money that we need and the projects? And this is what it looks like. It's that long-term plan, and it doesn't happen overnight. The other takeaway here is
hit to your pocketbook. I mean, looking at that green steady increase, that's a beautiful green line.
We can handle that.
That is not something that's going to dip deep in your pockets on one random year.
Right. Imagine like a special assessment bar. Call it, yellow. It would just shoot way up one year.
Yeah.
Because you aren't prepared and you're not funding up for those expenses that are coming. The other thing I like about what this illustrates is in the near term, we're saving up and then we're spending because we got some of those bigger expenses. But then, like I said, further out, much further out, we have those big projects again. And likely those are the same components, just the next replacement cycle.
Yeah.
And so this is great for those boards that have been doing it right. They funded their reserves, they've done all their projects, and they call me up and say,
pattern.
Because a lot of times they don't recognize that this is all going to happen again, and they want to take their foot off the gas. And they say, look, Nick, we did all our major projects. We were reserving this, but now we don't need to reserve so much because we did everything. Well,
now we're smooth sailing. We don't have to worry about it anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it doesn't work that way.
Nothing lasts forever, and there will be another cycle of that exact same component in 10, 20, 30 years. And so we can prepare for that, because if we didn't have that foresight and we weren't building up those funds, then you imagine that hit that 2043, 2044 would take on our reserves. And then we would need to special assess. Then we would need to, find another funding source. So that's kind of the story that all of this tells financially. And really everything
paints the picture
that I wanted to cover. Yeah, I think that it does too. This QR code will pull up a reserve study overview, which does show you an example of the financial analysis. So you'll see, every itemized component, every itemized expense, but they're laid out in just one page. So there's a lot of information there, but it's very easy to use and to find what you need. So take a look at that if you've never seen one of those before. And it talks through the different sections of the reserve study, some things that we didn't cover today. But hopefully that was
very productive and informative. And I really appreciate taking the time to connect with us, Nick, to discuss the reasons why it's so important to be proactive in your spending and the financial health of our communities. What an amazing contribution this would help to fulfill those fiduciary responsibilities with our board members.
Yeah, 100%. I'm glad. Hopefully, if this just takes one tiny step further to you guys, to your community being in a better position, then, it was all worth it, really. And you're not alone in these challenges and these frustrations and the pushback. You're not alone. So talk to CAMs, talk to your management, talk to, there's professional providers out there. We're all kind of doing this together, and we can all learn from one another. You'd be surprised if you talk to another board member at a different association. They probably have a lot of the same challenges, maybe have some good solutions. So community is key between the professionals, the management company, other associations. You're not in a vacuum. You're not on your own. And there's people that have probably, whether they're professionals or just peers, that have seen these similar challenges and have some good suggestions and solutions. So we are certainly here to help, as I
Great
know
takeaway.
Pam's is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the whole point. That's the whole point of the trusted service provider programming, having great vendors and service providers like yourself to help us navigate these waters that can be challenging at best.
Oh
But
yeah, no
again,
doubt.
Nick, thank you so much. We appreciate you taking the time to speak with us about this today, and we will include your contact information. You know, you have it here on the screen as well, but in order for our board members to reach out and obtain some helpful information, we'll link that below. Again, Nick, have a wonderful rest of your day. We appreciate your time today, and we'll see you soon.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.